afternoon is budget season at the Capitol, and I'm here with State Representative Ryan Warner to talk about a bill that he sponsored called the Taxpayer Protection Act that's looking out for all taxpayers in the Commonwealth. Welcome.
Thank you very much for having me here today. Happy to be here.
Glad you're here to talk about this bill. So this bill's been introduced in the past. Can you tell everybody what the Taxpayer Protection Act is?
Yeah, so the Taxpayer Protection Act is actually a constitutional amendment. I introduced it this year's House Bill 1316. And what it does is it would amend the Pennsylvania Constitution to cap or put limits on how much money government can spend. So it would limit every budget season how much money the legislature and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would be able to spend.
And what brought you to the point where you thought this legislation was needed?
Well, you know, it was one of the main reasons that I ran to be in this position. I thought that government was wasteful and inefficient and wasted a lot of taxpayer dollars. Let's just look, for example, since the 1970s. The state budget has increased by over 100%. And that's adjusted for inflation, over 100%. We can go back to the year 2000. Our state budget has doubled since the year 2000. I always ask people, I said, think about the year 2000. It wasn't that far off in the past. It's doubled since then. Is the state government twice as better, or your services from government twice as better since the year 2000? Or do you think the government's wasting your money? So I just think that the government spending is out of control, and that this is a necessary implement to put the reins on that.
Well, some people would say elected officials are elected to make these decisions, so why do we need, a constitutional amendment?
Absolutely, and I've had that very question proposed to me, and what I say to them is, look, our country, this state was founded on principles that limited what government can do, right? Is that not the purpose of the Constitution? It tells you what the legislative branch can and can't do. We look at the Bill of Rights. That's a whole list in every amendment to the Constitution that literally restricts what government can and can't do. To those people, I've always been reminded of the quote from President Madison. And President Madison said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. And if angels would govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. And, I think that we can see that with our federal government being over $20 trillion in debt, that our state constantly having budget overruns and deficits, that we are not governed by angels.
So how would this proposal work if this goes through?
Well, so what would happen is that each year we would, the limit would be based on the previous year's budget, okay? That we would be able to increase the amount of spending based on the state's population growth and inflation. And it would be a 3-year average of population growth and inflation to avoid any big spikes. So, in other words, if going into this year, if the 3-year average of inflation was 1% and the 3-year average of population growth in the state was 1%, then the budget could increase by 2%. There is one provision in there because people may say, well, what if there's a natural disaster or something comes up that there's federal monies taken away that you may need to fill that gap? There is a provision in there. If you have 75% majority in both the House and Senate, the cap could be lifted. Okay. So if you were to spend more money than what that is in place, you would need an overwhelming majority to do it.
Where's the support lie for this? Are you hearing from folks on both sides of the aisle or in both chambers?
Well, so last session we did pass it out of the House. We got 103 votes. I think there were 82 or 83 nay votes, and it passed, unfortunately, largely on party lines, which is unfortunate because I don't think that this has to be a partisan issue. There are, many. There have been many surveys and polls that show this has overwhelming support, 60 plus, 70% plus support in the Commonwealth. the one thing I always try to keep in mind is that, look, if you vote no against this, if you don't support this, you're not giving the voters or the taxpayers the chance to vote on it, because ultimately that's what it does, right? Because this is a constitutional amendment, the governor doesn't approve it, right? It has to be approved by the voters on a referendum. So we do have support. It was voted out of the House last session, and we were able to get it out of Senate committee. Unfortunately, it did not run on the Senate floor, but I'm very hopeful this year that we keep pushing and move it along.
So you mentioned the fact that this is a different procedure because it's not a normal bill. It's proposing to change our Constitution, so it should have a longer process, because that's a serious thing if we make a change to that document. Can you talk about that process, just the brief step?
Yeah, absolutely, because you are changing the Constitution of the Commonwealth. It should be a more involved process. And what that process is that to have it pass and actually change the Constitution, you have to have the same exact bill, the same exact language pass 2 sessions in a row. Okay. So in other words, let's say that we get the Taxpayer Protection Act passed this year through the House and Senate. Next session, the same language would have to be approved in the House and Senate. Then that fall, the next fall, it would go on the ballot as a referendum, and all the voters across the Commonwealth would get to decide whether they wanted to amend the Constitution, which I think is a great process. Which is, again, it's frustrating to not see this get passed, because we're denying the taxpayers and the voters of this Commonwealth to decide whether government spends too much money.
So at what point are we with this bill? What happens next?
Well, right now it has, on the House version of it, it has been introduced to the State Government Committee, which I hope will be running out soon, as we are working on the state's budget currently here in the month of June. I am hoping that even if we are not able to get this passed immediately before the budget, that we hold these principles to this budget that we are working on. That we've seen proposals from the government that would increase spending over 6% for this year's budget, which I think is unnecessary. Again, that's well over what the inflation and population growth would be. That number would be around 2.4, 2.3% growth, and we're going to go spend another 6%. There's been a proposal for another 6% growth. Our revenues are in higher this year, which is a lot of, why you see a lot of politicians in Harrisburg wanting to spend that money. This would basically say, no, you're not going to spend this money. You're going to put it away for a rainy day fund. For when the economy isn't doing so good. And rather than raising taxes, which we have just fought off for the last 4 years, you'll have the money in reserve.
Right.
So hence taxpayer protection.
Well, thank you so much for fighting for the taxpayers, and we appreciate the time you've taken today to be here.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. And if you have any questions for Representative Warner, his contact information will be shown in just a moment. Thanks for watching.